to the UIAAA Connection podcast. GoFan and VNN are proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection. Now a combined company, GoFan and VNN provide a seamless integration for digital ticketing and athletic websites. Direct your fans to one place for all your athletic events, communications, and tickets to home and away games. Thank you to GoFan and VNN for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Carter Wilson, Certified Master Athletic Administrator and the Assistant Executive Director of the Georgia Athletic Directors Association. Welcome to the podcast, Carter.
Thank you, Mark. It is certainly a pleasure to be here.
Let's have you begin by sharing with our audience here in Utah and across the nation and the world now, since we've gone international, where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, etc.
Okay. I am from Decatur, Georgia. For most people, it is a small town just outside of Atlanta. We're 6 miles from downtown Atlanta. City of Decatur is a small city. It's actually 4 square miles big. So we have the luxury of living in two great worlds. We got the great city of Atlanta, 6 miles down the street, but most of the time we stay right here in the city of Decatur and do our own thing here. I was born and raised here. Actually, my mother served as the mayor of the city of Decatur as I was growing up. So, this is a place I've been for almost 70 years now, and we don't go very far.
Well, that's awesome. Let me ask you a follow-up. So Decatur, only 4 square miles, but obviously it's considered suburban Atlanta then. I mean, people from outside Georgia would just think you're from Atlanta, even though it's just a
Absolutely.
town.
Absolutely. Okay. But I have to make sure that I make the point, because somebody from Decatur would see this and they would say, I cannot believe you claimed Atlanta and didn't claim the city of Decatur. So Decatur born and bred here. Went
That's
to Decatur
awesome.
High School after graduation. Went to Clark Atlanta University on a basketball scholarship, where I played for a great guy, Coach L.S. Epps there. And afterwards, I was an accounting major, worked a couple of years in business and realized that wasn't what I really wanted to do. What I wanted to do was coach. And it led me back into coaching, and I started my coaching career right here in Decatur, Georgia.
So before you retired, you spent, if I heard you correctly, you spent your entire career at one school?
No, actually I didn't. I started in Decatur, and when I started, Mark, all I ever wanted to do was to be the head basketball coach at Decatur High School before I was 30 years old. Well, as fate would have it, I ended up getting the head basketball job when I was 27 years old. The guy that I played for, who had been the head coach there, now I'm working for him. He became the first coach to leave the high school ranks to go into the NBA. He was on the staff with Mike Fratello with the Atlanta Hawks, and I ended up getting promoted to be the head basketball coach at Decatur High School. I did that for 2 years. Afterwards, the guy that I worked for, Bob Reinhardt, left the Atlanta Hawks and got the head position at Georgia State University. And he brought me along. So I left Decatur High School before I was 30 to be an assistant basketball coach at Georgia State University, where I stayed from 1985 until 1997. From 93 to 97, I was the head basketball coach there at Georgia State University. And after leaving Georgia State in 97, I came back to Decatur High School, where they started a position of athletic director and needed a head basketball coach. I had earned my graduate degree in athletic administration while I was at Georgia State, so it all fit together perfect. I came full circle. It took me a bunch of years to do it, but I made my way back to Decatur.
That's perfect. So, well, I had obviously a follow-up thought. It slipped my mind, but it will come back to me. Talk about youth sports in Decatur, and because you're close to my age. So when we were kids, at least me, I mean, you went out the house in the morning in the summer at 8, you didn't come back till the sun was down, and you were playing Little League baseball, Little League basketball, playing with your friends. Talk about the youth sports climate there in Decatur.
Oh, we have outstanding youth programs here in the city of Decatur. I had an opportunity to grow up in those youth programs, and had the pleasure of having my son to go through those programs as well. I started my coaching career actually, Mark, when I was 13 years old. Uh, we had a summer baseball program, and it was for youth 12 and under. All of my friends were 12. I turned 13 in January, and the cutoff date was March. So I couldn't play on the team. I was 13. So I ended up coaching those guys. And not only did we win the championship, but the bug actually bit me about coaching at 13 years old. And I didn't know how I was going to get back to it or when I was going to get back to it, but I knew ultimately I would be a coach.
Well, now that's fascinating. I've got to ask you, what was it like coaching at 13 kids that are, some of them probably 2 or 3 months younger than you, and at least within that year time frame? So how did you get I mean, 12-year-olds can be mean kids. How do you get the respect, and how do you coach those kids at that young age? I'm fascinated to know that.
I learned something that was very important, that all players respect you if they believe that you're doing the right thing and that you trust their abilities, and you have to make some tough decisions. At 13, I was deciding the lineup, who was going to play, who was going to sit on the bench, all of those things. But those guys trusted me. And while I was 13 years old, they believed that I was doing the right thing. And that's something that I took to the high school level, to the college level. If players believe in what you're doing, they'll follow you.
That is great. That is great wisdom. Thanks for sharing that. Another question I wanted to ask to show my ignorance of the geography in Georgia. Georgia State is in what city?
It's in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta. It's it's probably, as a recruiter, I used to tell people it was the best kept secret in the state of Georgia. An enrollment of 50,000 is actually the largest university in the state of Georgia right now. And it was a place that suffered from an identity crisis. At the time I was there, our president had played football at the University of Alabama, but most people went to Georgia State University to get graduate degrees. It is a feeder into the business community in downtown Atlanta. You got all of the Fortune 500 companies there. It was leading all of the universities in the state of supplying workers for those institutes, for those businesses. But as far as athletics went, there was ways to go. There were people that felt like it was a place that should have been playing intramural sports and not Division I sports. And ultimately, we finally got it turned around, Mark. And in 1991, I was a part of the staff that became the first team in Georgia State history to go to the NCAA tournament. We'll never forget it. It was really a dream come true that Georgia State would be in the NCAAs. And actually, we ended up playing the ultimate champions, the University of Arkansas, when they had Coach Nolan Richardson and 40 Minutes of Hell. We ended up playing them in the opening round. And I didn't care. It was a great experience. We got beat by 40, but who cares? We were there.
Well, let me ask you this, and of course, my memory's faded. but in 91, I think you said, I think the tournament may still have been only 32 teams. I don't know if it had gone to 64 by then.
It was 64 at that
Okay.
time, and we went as a conference champion. We were members of the Trans-American Athletic Conference, TAAC, conference that's no longer in existence. But it was one where we earned our way, and I'll never forget, we were the first tournament of the year of the March Madness season. And after we won, we watched Sports Center all night to see them say, Georgia State is dancing all over again. It was on loop, but we stayed up all night watching it.
That is awesome. Carter, let's have you share with our audience some of the mentors and leaders that have had a great effect in your life.
Sure. There are lots of people, Mark. One of the things I pride myself on is I think I'm a life learner, and I want to take something from everybody that I come in contact with. So, obviously with Mom being, the mayor of the city of Decatur, took a lot from her mom and dad there at home. Bob Reinhardt, who I played for in high school, worked for at Georgia State, and worked for there at Decatur High School. He was another one. The guy that I played for in college, L.S. Epps, he was, I think, one of the most underrated coaches ever. He was a disciple of John Wooden, and I grew up knowing UCLA offense backwards and forwards and being able to teach it. And he was just a great teacher and a great motivator. Didn't have a lot at Clark Atlanta, being a Division II school, but he always found a way to get his players to play at a high level. And, one of my bosses, Dr. Phyllis Edwards, she was the athletic director that I worked for when I came back to the city of Decatur. We did something that people didn't think could ever be done in Decatur, and that was build new facilities. Decatur had a gymnasium that was built in 1939. It was a WPA project with a whopping seating capacity of 364. They had a football stadium that was built in 1928, one of the oldest facilities in the nation. When she came, she was determined that good coaching and good teaching is all the same. I wouldn't have my kids in a math lab that was not state of the art. I'm not going to have my student athletes in a facility that's not state of the art. And she was hell bent and determined. And she said, I will get you these things, but you must be the face of this project. We shook hands on that. And she also said, and one other thing, you can't leave until the project is completed. And we shook hands on that. And lo and behold, we were able to get it done. And she really stands out as a tremendous mentor and a tremendous boss that I had along the way.
Great leaders. Thanks so much for sharing that. Carter, what's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
Looking back, Mark, the biggest disappointment I have is that I played college basketball for only 1 year. I was given a scholarship. I was probably a typical freshman, wasn't nearly as good as I thought I was. Didn't play as much during that time. They had junior varsity teams in college. So I had played there, played in 1 or 2 games on the varsity level. And I got to the end of the season and I just decided, this is not what I envisioned, and I'm going to step away from it. What I learned many years later is there are going to be times when things don't go exactly like you want them to go, but give it time. We all have a tendency to pull up on things too short. And if I just thought another 2 weeks about that decision, I probably would have stayed. And I tell myself I would have been a good college basketball player. Not a great one, but I would have been a good one. I had a good career, had great relationships with the coaching staff and my teammates. They all wanted me to stay. And I regret pulling up too soon on that. Now, what did I learn? Give it time. And the second thing I learned, and I used quite a bit when I was a coach, always check in on your players, know what they're thinking. And one of the policies that I had as a coach on the high school level and the college level, I would meet with every player every week on a Monday. They had to come in my office and we had to sit down and talk. We weren't going to talk about X's. We weren't going to talk about O's. We're going to talk about how you're doing. How's that math class coming? How's your mama? How's your girlfriend? Things like that. If I think I'd had somebody checking in on me a little bit more, I probably would have stayed. But again, it was a tough lesson to learn, but it's one that I learned, and I've taken it with me since leaving Clark Atlanta and the basketball program there.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about the job of athletic administrator today and how it's different from when you first got the job as an AD.
Well, when I first got the job, there was no job description. There was this sort of disconnect between athletics and academics. I really didn't know what was expected. But again, I think I'm a fast learner, and I said, where can I go to get information? So I would go, I'll never forget going to the first GADA conference, and I would read the room, as young people say, and I would see who's talking, who's got great programs. I would get the newspaper, I knew who was winning, but who had great programs. And I wanted to make sure that I met those people. As a coach, I would go to the Final Four every year, and it was nothing to go up to Dean Smith or go up to John Thompson and introduce yourself. And as an athletic director, I said I was going to do the exact same thing. So I went up to people, introduced myself, and made their acquaintance, and then decided, how can I get these people to share with me the things that they're doing and the things that they know. What I found out was most people in athletics are more than willing to share information if you will only take the time to ask. And I started reaching out to people, and lo and behold, I found myself on the board with the GADA because I wanted to know. I wanted to seek information. And from there, it went from the local level, the state level, and then to NIAAA and the national level. I would go to the national conference and I'd see guys like yourself and all of these guys are, in the room. I need to know these guys, and I was not afraid to, introduce myself and where I'm from and, ask a question. I think that is the biggest difference. Today, guys have more information available to them, and they don't have to go and they can look at a podcast. They can go on Twitter. They can go to a lot of different places to get information that we didn't have access to when we started in this business.
That is well said. Let's delve a little bit more. You mentioned your first years in the GADA and then on to the NIAAA. So let's go more in detail. Talk about your journey with the Georgia Association. I'm sure when you first got involved, I'm sure Lucia would have been in charge back in those days. And then talk about how it is you got to be on the board, and then talk more in detail about, and then I'll ask you a little bit later once you had your time on the NIAAA board.
Sure, sure. Well, with the GADA, the first thing I decided was I'm going to meet all of these people. Lucia was legendary in the state of Georgia, and especially here in the metro Atlanta area. She was an AD icon, for lack of a better term, here. And I knew of her before I actually knew her. And I was like, I need to know her. I know her name, she's just that person that I needed to know. So after the first conference, I made sure that I went up and introduced myself to her, and would ask her questions about what did I need to do to become better at this job. We both served in the same county. I'm in the city of Decatur in those 4 square miles, and she had everything outside of the city in the county. So we were in the same county, and I needed to know her. So I made it a point to go and have that conversation. And as time went on, they were always looking, encouraging people to get involved. And I wanted to get involved, and I wanted to serve on the board. And, I was able to do that. And I started off, I worked in, you know, LTCs, I worked in membership, I worked in a lot of different things. And ultimately, I was elected to be, on the executive board there. And I went from, third vice president, second, first. And in 2010, I ended up being the president of the GADA. And it was a great experience. Georgia is the biggest state east of the Mississippi River. And, there is a tremendous, opportunity for growth in the state of Georgia. But, we tend to be more metro Atlanta heavy. And there are places where we're actually needed more in South Georgia. So as the president of GADA, I wanted to get out. I wanted to meet those people. I wanted to touch those people. Those are the people that need to come to the conference. And, again, if they were not going to reach out to me, I was going to reach out to them. So it was a great experience being a part of the GADA and being on their board. And, as we went through it, and, I served a time with the NIAAA, but I never really left the GADA. Well, we came back after COVID and all the things that were going on. I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity. I retired in 2017 from Decatur, and I would just, sell off into the sunset there. But the younger members of the GADA board had different thoughts, and they were like, no, we're not going to lose all of this institutional knowledge and wisdom to retirement. You can play golf and still do this.
Yeah.
So, I stayed on the board, and while it was a great experience being on the board early on, it's even better now, Mark. Couldn't imagine it being any better than it is right now.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. I want to talk for a minute about your time on the NIAAA board, a multi-pronged question. First, how did you get out of Section 3? Because Section 3 has so many legends. I'm not even going to start to mention them because I'll forget somebody. But that you had to make it to be the person from Section 3. And then at that time, you had to run against Section 2 and Section 1. I know what it's like to run as the at-large because I lost years before you ran, back when it was 6, 7, and 8. But talk about that experience, putting yourself out there to be the at-large, and then talk about the experience of being on the NIAAA board, because that's such a special deal.
Yes. Well, I must admit, I had great mentors in Section 3. I can say without reservations, I really if I just knew then what I know now, it would have been a much better situation for me all the way around. But it was a great, great experience. That Section 3, getting out of there, uh, man, you talking about being smoked over. I remember going to the Section 3 meeting in May, and we held it here in Atlanta. And, we had all of the states represented, and I had the opportunity to introduce myself and just talk about, my vision and talk about some of the things that I would like to see happening in Section 3 as well as nationally. And, I made it through that process. Yeah, it was, you're talking about a sigh of relief. When I left that room, man, I was like, whew, it couldn't be any tougher. But little did I know the experience of running at large was something that I'll never, ever, ever forget. I remember, first of all, I was supposed to be there on a Friday, and we were going to do speeches and all on a Saturday.
Yeah.
As fate would have, my flight was delayed in Atlanta. There was all kind of
Yeah.
problems with
Because that
that.
never
So I
happens in
missed
Atlanta.
right. So I missed the Friday part, which would have at least allowed me to kind of, read the room, see who's there, just get a feel for everybody. So I show up Saturday morning, and I'll never forget, uh, uh, Mike Blackburn, called me and said, "Are you okay? We were worried about you. We didn't know what was going on." I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm here, and I'll be ready this afternoon, 5 o'clock, there in Anaheim."
Mm-hmm.
Well, my wife is with me, and she's like, "Oh, you got this. You got this." And she was acting as my motivational coach in all of this. And the things I remember about that day, the three of us were sitting there, and we drew straws for the order of the
Right.
speeches. I end up with the second speech, which was like, okay, that's not bad. I would prefer to be first and just get it out of the way. At least my stress level would have been, over with at that time. I draw the second straw. We're sitting there, and the chairs were so close together, Mark. My knees were shaking, and I was shaking the guys sitting next to me because I was so nervous.
Oh, wow.
And, so I go up and I give my talk, and to this day, I cannot remember one thing about actually talking. So we all finished and we sat down. And in Anaheim, if you remember, the keynote speaker was Bill Walton.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Walton stands up there and says, and I never forget this, I don't have a vote, but if I had one, I'd vote for that guy from Georgia, Carter Wilson.
Oh,
And I was
yes.
like, really? It wasn't a paid political endorsement, but if I had any money, I would have paid him at that point in time. And I don't know if anybody else heard it or cared, but when I heard him say that, I just relaxed at that point in time. And, it turned out that I was voted onto the board there from there. But that experience was one that I will never, ever, ever forget. Now, being on the board was so special. And what I realized by being on the board, that the United States is a lot bigger than I thought it was. All of these places have high schools, and as an at large, you're representing all of these places. So my world started to expand. My vision about athletics started to expand. It wasn't just that 4 square miles all over again. Now I'm representing everybody. And just being in that room, and just like when I started, I wanted to know who the players were. Here, I'm in the room with all of the players,
Yeah.
and just the insight that you get from being in that environment with all of those people. And I'm a lot like you now. I don't want to start calling names because I'll forget somebody and I would be in a world of trouble by doing that. But it was the greatest experience. And I see why it's set up the way it is. I see why you can only serve one term and then you got to rotate off, because more people should be
You would
able
never
to
leave.
experience. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So share with us your observations. I say the recent NIAAA conference, 2002 in Nashville, but it's now it's not so recent. It's been 8 months ago, but talk about that conference. Really, I know Denver was the first time back, but we all had masks still, but really the most people ever at a national conference, and really felt like we were back to normal in Nashville. So share some of your thoughts about that conference.
I concur with you wholeheartedly. I think back about 22, and it was the year of real transition for the NIAAA. Yep, 20, we were virtual. I remember my wife and I did a workshop during that time, and it wasn't what anybody wanted, but it was what we needed to. We needed to get together in some way, shape, or form to say, we're still standing. We're going through this thing, but we're still standing. And in 2021 in Denver, it was okay. We're coming out right now. We got the mask on, and there were certain things we could do, certain things we couldn't do, but we're coming out. We're not going to be defeated with all of this. And last year in Nashville, which was our biggest, and you know, you hate to start saying what was the best because everyone is the best. But it was, I thought, an outstanding conference. It was certainly well attended there in Tennessee. And it was the year of transition, not only from virtual to mass to back in business, but it was also the transition from Whitehead to Blackburn to now Rising, Barton,
Yeah.
and Moran being in charge. So it will always be one that is that year of transition for the NIAAA, and it will be always special because of the transition that took place there.
Thank you. Let me ask you this question. I want to know if you have any stories about your Section 3 people. I said I wasn't going to mention anybody, but I will mention one of the legends from North Carolina, Jerry McGee. He was obviously still alive back then when you and I were on the board. But talk about if you have one or two stories just with this, because Section 3, as people know, and I'm going to forget a state, so it's all that whole southeastern part. And like I said, so many legends. I'm not going to mention other people because I will get in trouble, but maybe you have a couple of humorous Section 3 stories you could share with us.
Well, Jerry McGee was legendary in Section 3 from North Carolina. Section 3 encompasses North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and Tennessee, which I almost forgot.
Yeah.
You know, it encompasses all of those areas. But Jerry he was that guy that I wanted to really meet because of the way that he commanded respect in the Section 3 meeting. Everybody from every state had a boss, for the lack of a better term. But Jerry was the boss of the bosses there. And we were in a Section 3 meeting, and it got a little bit contentious one year. And it started to kind of pull apart. I remember Jerry McGee as the guy that said, hey, let's calm down, let's talk through this, and got us back on track in such a way that only he could. Everybody couldn't do that, and
Right.
only somebody special could do that, and he was that special person. He also was, a guy that, I felt that, as the Section 3 rep, he was in my corner.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I wasn't sure, I always felt like I can do this. He was just that guy. And again, he wasn't from Georgia, but he would put, national ahead of everything, put section ahead of state, and he always made sure that, I never, ever, ever, being in Section 3, and as rough and rumble as we can be sometimes, I never felt uncomfortable being in Section 3 because of the fact that Jerry McGee was in the room.
That is a great story. Thanks so much for sharing. Carter, what's the favorite part of your job now that you're the assistant executive director, now that you're no longer a building AD?
Well, the best part of it is being able to help our board to see the bigger picture. And I think the fact that being in this position now, after having served on the NIAAA board, there are things that nationally make sense that you may not think about in the state level. And just being able to share that kind of knowledge and wisdom with them. All of these people are good people. And you can't really fault somebody for not knowing because they hadn't been in the room. And the fact that you and I both have been in that room, we know, you know, globally, nationally, we see things from just a little bit different perspective. And, being able to share that with them is the greatest thing in the world. You can't beat them over the head. Sometimes you got to be like, Nelson Mandela and gently lead from behind on a lot of things. But, just being able to do that, I think makes this position just wonderful.
Excellent. Let's finish up with a couple of questions that I always use at the end of these interviews.
Okay.
The first one being, I want Carter's 2 suggestions for a brand new AD. Something that they need to follow, you 2 suggestions in order to become successful. What would your suggestions be?
Okay. I got a couple. Well, actually, I got 3 things.
Then
Number
give
one,
us 3.
get involved. That's going to be number one. Get involved with your professional organization. And that is on the local level and the state level. Okay. Right away. And there are also opportunities at the national level to get involved. Don't shy away from those opportunities. Okay. Use your resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel now. There are so many places where you can get information. There are so many places where people are willing to share with you what they know and the things that have really made them successful. It was almost like, going to my first coaching clinic. And I remember John Wooten, and I drove over to Birmingham, Alabama. And it was a Sunday morning, and Coach Wooten started it off. He read a scripture and got the room right. And then he proceeded for 2.5 hours to share information about his success there at UCLA. And I was blown away with that. And I said, if I'm ever in a position where I can share information with young people, I'm going to do that. And there are lots of people in this profession of athletic administrator who are willing to share information. So use your resources to gain as much information as you can. And if there's a third thing, it would be, don't be afraid to take chances. as an athletic administrator, you're going to look at everything from a lot of different angles. Don't get to a place where you can do something special if only you would take a chance. Don't miss the opportunity because you're afraid to take a chance. Do something special when the opportunity presents itself. So those are my three things.
Great pieces of advice. Carter, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
I guess you asked me about my biggest disappointment. I would say, what about my biggest successes?
Okay, then what is your biggest success? Share that.
I think the biggest one is a two-pronged thing. Number one, building facilities in the city of Decatur. That is something that even though I'm gone now and I drive by there on a regular basis, that I know how difficult that was to get done. So I will always be proud of that. And the second thing was we started a Hall of Fame there. I just kind of followed the roadmap that NIAAA did when they started their Hall of Fame. You know, we have some tremendous student athletes who've gone on to do great things. And I just followed that roadmap, and we have one that I would say is second to none, especially for a high school there. And I am extremely proud of that. And the thing about it is, it gets all of those people in those 4 square miles talking about who deserves to be there and who doesn't. And that was one of the reasons I wanted it. It keeps athletics on the forefront there. And hopefully it motivates student athletes to know who all came through these halls before me and will motivate them to be special.
Thanks for sharing those successful stories. That wraps it up for this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our guest today has been Carter Wilson, Certified Master Athletic Administrator and the Assistant Executive Director of the Georgia Athletic Directors Association. Carter, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.